They say some people enter your life quietly, like a whisper that turns into a headline. For me, that whisper was Damien Holt. We met 3 years ago at a corporate leadership retreat on the Devon coast, one of those glass and granite resorts where ambition smells faintly of sea salt and espresso. Everyone there was selling something, an idea, a dream, a version of themselves that looked good under fluorescent lighting. Damien didn't need to sell anything. He had that rare, unnerving ease of someone who already owned the room. He spoke with the calm confidence of a man who'd rehearsed the world and memorized his lines. And when he looked at you, he made you feel like the only unsolved mystery left in it. I was giving a keynote that morning, Leadership in Uncertain Economies. He sat in the front row, not taking notes, not glancing at his phone, just watching. Afterwards, while I was packing my laptop, he appeared beside me with a glass of still water and said, "You speak like someone who's not trying to prove anything." It was the kind of compliment that landed deeper than it should. That night at dinner, he found me again. He talked about risk and timing, about how companies and people fail when they confuse movement with progress. He asked what I wanted out of life, then listened as if the answer would determine the next decade of his. He had the kind of attention that made you feel seen, until you realized later it was also how he studied people.
I didn't see that then.
All I saw was someone who understood the loneliness of competence. When he asked me out the following week, it felt inevitable. We moved fast, too fast, maybe. He made everything look easy. Reservations in impossible restaurants, weekend getaways that felt like stolen pages from someone else's life, words that fit too perfectly. He was the kind of man people called magnetic. The kind who said, "Trust me," and made you want to. My friends were thrilled. My parents were cautious. My father, a retired lawyer, met Damien once and said later, "He's either the best man you'll ever know, or the most dangerous." I laughed it off. I told him Damien was ambitious, not dangerous. That he just had presence, that rare mix of confidence and charm that made things happen. He just said quietly, "So, does lightning." We married 8 months later. A spring wedding, all glass and white roses, minimalist and precise, the way Damien liked things. He handled most of it, the venue, the music, even the vows. He said I'd done enough planning in my life. This time he wanted me to relax. The night before, he came into the room with a slim navy folder. Embossed gold lettering, Holt Enterprises Legal. He said it was just a formality, a prenuptial agreement, drafted by his legal team. "It's nothing complicated," he said, smiling. "You know how it is. The board wants clarity. If something happens, God forbid, we both walk away clean."
No messy headlines.
I remember staring at the pages. I'd handled contracts more complex than this, mergers, acquisitions, entire restructures, but somehow when it came to this, I didn't read as carefully as I should have. Because love, in its early form, makes you illogical. It replaces caution with hope. And hope doesn't question paperwork.
So I signed.
He kissed me after, brushed a thumb across my cheek, and said, "You'll never need to worry about that document, Mara. We're on the same side." I believed him. The first year was perfect, the kind of perfect that feels rehearsed. He asked me to join Holt & Partners, his logistics firm, saying, "Who better to run strategy than the person I trust most?" He made it sound romantic. It was, at first. I became the company's chief strategy officer, unofficially because the title was interim consultant, but the work was real, and I was good at it. The company was leaking profit through mismanaged accounts, outdated processes, and inflated contracts. I fixed it. Quietly, efficiently. Within 9 months, Holt & Partners turned a corner. The press called it a bold restructuring led by the firm's visionary CEO. That CEO, my husband, smiled for cameras and thanked his incredible team. He didn't mention me. Not once. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. We were married. What was his success, if not ours? But the truth is, it did matter. Something inside me noticed. Something small, a flicker of discomfort, quickly buried under pride. He'd ask for my input before every investor meeting, then present my strategies as his ideas. word for word. He'd charm the room, close the deal, and later, over dinner, say, "You make me look good." He said it like a compliment. It sounded like ownership. Our house was in Surrey, sleek, minimalist, full of glass and silence. He said the openness helped him think. I said it made the echoes too loud. Sometimes I'd watch him in the mornings, the precision with which he buttoned his cufflinks, adjusted his tie, checked his reflection before heading out. There was no spontaneity in him. Everything was calculated, even the warmth. I didn't see the control for what it was then. I called it care. He called it love. And so I followed. I worked for him. I supported him. I built alongside him. It took me 2 years to realize I was constructing a kingdom that only carried his name. But by then, the foundations were already poured, and the doors were quietly locking behind me. If you've ever given too much to someone who mistook it for weakness, hit subscribe, comment "not anymore" below, and share this for every woman who's ever been silenced. If marriage is supposed to make two people one, ours did. But somehow, the one we became was always him. I told myself it was temporary, that the imbalance was just growing pains. New roles, new responsibilities, the company expanding faster than either of us expected. But even then I could feel it, the subtle rewiring of language. The way we became he. The way our company became his. At Holt & Partners, I started every morning before sunrise. By 7, I was in the office, the one tucked beside his, smaller but close enough for him to call out ideas through the glass. My desk was always neat. Post-its, spreadsheets, investor forecasts, endless drafts of quarterly reports. Damien thrived on vision. I thrived on detail. He'd walk into a room and fill it with possibility. Words like scale, expansion, domination, and I'd trail behind with plans to make those words real. He once told me, "You're the anchor, Mara. Without you, I'd float off into ideas." It sounded sweet then. Later, I understood it meant I was the weight that kept him from drifting too far from his reflection. The company grew fast. We landed contracts others had chased for years. Investors called Damien a young titan. He had the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, and the charm of someone who didn't need to be. He'd stand at the front of every conference room, pacing as he spoke, gesturing toward the slides I had designed. Our growth this quarter is the result of decisive restructuring and bold market shifts. He'd say, every phrase one I'd written, and every applause, every handshake, every congratulation went to him. I watched it happen from the sidelines, my name disappearing like invisible ink. At home, he'd thank me, privately. A touch on the hand, a kiss on the forehead. "You make me look like I know what I'm doing," he'd laugh. And I'd smile, because I wanted to believe that was affection, not ownership. Our home life blurred with the company. Dinner conversations were budgets and strategies. Weekends were investor calls. Even our arguments had spreadsheets between them. When we disagreed, he didn't raise his voice, he lowered it. He'd tilt his head, almost sympathetically, and say, "Mara, you're overthinking it again." Or worse, "You're too emotional about this." That was how he won every debate, not by being right, but by making logic sound like cruelty. I learned to choose my silences carefully. Because silence, around Damien, wasn't surrender, it was survival. The first time I realized how invisible I'd become was at a press dinner. A new logistics deal, one I'd negotiated myself, had made headlines. Reporters filled the restaurant, the air buzzing with champagne and flattery. One journalist turned to me and said, "You must be proud of your husband. What a turnaround story." I smiled. Polite. Painless. That was my role. The wife with grace, the silent partner, the ornament of his success. Later, in the car, I asked quietly, "Why didn't you mention me in your speech?" He glanced at me like I'd said something absurd. "Because it was a company achievement, Mara. You're part of me. I don't need to list you separately." Part of him. The phrase lingered, like perfume that doesn't wash off. Months passed. He hired new executives, younger, louder, men who adored him and echoed his every word. They called him the architect. They called me Mrs. Holt. When they spoke to me, It was with polite distance, the kind reserved for someone tolerated out of obligation. I noticed the small things. How meetings started before I arrived, how my suggestions were interesting until Damien rephrased them, how my reports were edited before reaching the board. Slowly, I stopped trying to be heard. Because every time I spoke, my voice came back filtered through him. He thrived on admiration. The office adored him, his charm, his decisiveness, his vision. I saw the way the younger women looked at him, the mix of awe and curiosity, the quiet calculation of ambition. He loved it. He never acted on it, not yet, but he loved the power of being wanted. One evening, during an internal gala, I caught him laughing with a new executive, a woman named Elena, confident and too comfortable for someone who joined last week. Her hand lingered too long on his sleeve. His smile lingered longer. When he saw me watching, he didn't flinch. He raised his glass in a mock toast, a warning disguised as a gesture of affection. Later that night, I asked if he'd enjoyed himself. He kissed my cheek and said, "Jealousy doesn't suit you." Then he went upstairs. I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the echo of my own heartbeat. It wasn't jealousy. It was clarity. I had built something, a company, a home, a marriage, on the illusion of partnership. And now, I could feel it shifting beneath me. Damien Holt was building an empire, and I was becoming one of its foundations, unseen, uncredited, but necessary to keep it standing. The world saw us as a power couple, but power, I was learning, is rarely shared. It's lent, briefly, until the lender forgets it was ever yours. And in the quiet after that dinner, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Silence wasn't weakness. It was storage. Every word I didn't say was a weapon waiting to be sharpened. I just didn't know yet how soon I'd need them. There's a strange kind of loneliness that only appears in a crowd applauding your work, while looking at someone else. By the time our third year at Holt and Partners began, Damien had become a minor celebrity in business circles. Magazines called him the strategist of the decade. Podcasts introduced him as the visionary CEO transforming the logistics industry. None of them mentioned that the company's transformation plan was drafted at our dining table over cold takeout and my sleepless nights. None of them knew that every quarterly turnaround hailed as his genius was built from the formulas I created, the investor reports I rewrote, the negotiations I handled when he didn't want to appear desperate. There's a strange kind of loneliness that only appears in a crowd applauding your work, while looking at someone else. By the time our third year at Holt and Partners began, Damien had become a minor celebrity in business circles. Magazines called him the strategist of the decade. Podcasts introduced him as the visionary CEO transforming the logistics industry. None of them mentioned that the company's transformation plan was drafted at our dining table over cold takeout and my sleepless nights. None of them knew that every quarterly turnaround hailed as his genius was built from the formulas I created, the investor reports I rewrote, the negotiations I handled when he didn't want to appear desperate. But that was the trick of it. He never erased me directly. He just spoke fast enough that no one noticed who had the pen first. I remember one morning at the office, a Monday in March. Damien called a meeting to announce our next expansion phase. He stood at the head of the conference table, crisp suit, confident smirk, and flipped through the slides I designed. Each line, each number, each projection mine. And yet, when he spoke, it was like hearing someone read a eulogy for a life you were still living. This model, he said, gesturing to the chart, is a culmination of months of market study. We've positioned ourselves for sustainable growth, not just short-term wins. I sat 3 seats away, my name nowhere on the presentation. He caught my eye once, smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they've borrowed something they don't plan to return. Afterward, people clapped him on the back. "Brilliant as always, Damien. Your instincts are unreal." And then someone said it, the sentence that rewrote my place in the room. "You're lucky, Mara, to see this up close."
Lucky.
The word sat heavy in my chest, like a stone I couldn't cough out. It wasn't just public credit that disappeared, it was private trust. I'd once been the first person he showed his ideas to. Now, I was the last to hear them. He began hosting strategy dinners without telling me. New partnerships were signed before I even saw the drafts. If I questioned him, he'd deflect with practiced affection. You worry too much, Mara. You know I'd never make a move without you. Except he already had. When I checked his schedule one day, half the entries were marked private. When I asked about them, he laughed. Not everything's a conspiracy, love. Some things are just business. But business, in Damien's world, had begun to look a lot like secrecy. The first real crack came during an investor retreat in Lisbon. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, half meetings, half leisure. He told me there was no need for me to come this time. You've been working too hard. Take a break. He said it kindly. Too kindly. So I stayed home and watched the photos appear online. Holt and partners had been tagged by one of the junior analysts. There he was, Damien, smiling beside Elena Ruiz, the new executive with the red lipstick and the kind of ambition that didn't bother hiding itself. In one photo, she was leaning close, her hand brushing his arm. In another, they were laughing at something just between them. A caption beneath one image read, Holt and partners, where strategy meets synergy. Synergy. That word had always meant us. When he came home, I didn't ask. He looked relaxed, happy, lighter in a way that made me uneasy. He kissed my forehead and said, You'd have hated it. Too much small talk. Then he went upstairs to shower, humming. I walked to his office. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air, sharp and clean. On the desk was a folder he'd forgotten to lock away. Inside, notes, figures, minutes from the Lisbon meetings. And, at the bottom, her signature beside his. Elena Ruiz, acting deputy director. Acting. That was my title once, before he stopped acting like I existed. That night, I sat awake, replaying every small moment I'd ignored. The missed dinners, the half-truths, the gentle dismissals disguised as care. I wasn't surprised. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd once thought my silence was a strategy. That patience would bring respect. But silence had only made me invisible, and invisibility was a gift he used freely. He'd told the world our company was built on his genius. Soon, I feared, he'd tell them his marriage had survived because of his grace. The next morning, I put on my softest blouse, painted on composure, and kissed him goodbye before he left for work. He smiled, oblivious. He had no idea that beneath that calm, something had started to wake inside me. Slow, steady, deliberate. Not rage, not grief, but focus. Because I realized something. You can't take credit from someone who's already decided to stop giving it. From that day on, I started keeping copies. Every report, every email, every draft. Not for validation, but for evidence. I didn't know it yet, but my revenge had already begun. It started quietly, in folders labeled backups, and in silences that would soon make him listen. Betrayal doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it slips in through small things. A change in laughter, a missed call, a scent that doesn't belong to you. By the time I realized Damien was cheating, it wasn't shock I felt. It was precision. Elena Ruiz. I'd done my research the way any sensible woman does. Quietly, efficiently, without asking for permission. She joined Holt and Partners less than a year ago.
Impressive résumé.
Charismatic. Ambitious in the kind of way that made men believe in her, and women see her too clearly. At first, she'd been all respect and charm. Mrs. Holt, it's such an honor to work with you, she'd said the day we met. Her handshake was warm, her eyes assessing. A woman who smiled with purpose. Now her emails were signed simply E. And Damien's were shorter, vaguer, delayed. I didn't accuse him, not yet. I observed. Observation was safer than confrontation. It left fingerprints on no one. The evidence came piece by piece. Late nights at the office that stretched into dawn. Cologne I didn't recognize, something darker, newer. And the lipstick stain I found once on his coffee mug, faint but deliberate, like a signature she wanted me to see. He'd laugh when I asked why he worked so much. It's scaling season, Mara. You know how it is. Yes, I did. But scaling what? I started timing him, not like a jealous wife, but like an analyst. He left at 7:45 a.m., returned at 11:10 p.m., 3 nights in a row. On the fourth, he claimed he was in a board strategy dinner. The same board dinner I knew had been canceled that morning. That night, I followed him. Not like in films, no disguises, no trench coats. Just my car, 3 blocks behind his, heart steady, mind cold. He stopped at a private restaurant downtown one we used to visit for anniversaries. I parked across the street, half hidden by shadows. Through the glass, I saw him before he saw her. Damien, confident, magnetic, smiling the way he used to when he still needed to impress me. Then Elena arrived. Her dress was red, not office red, not polite red, the kind of red that knew what it was doing. They greeted each other like a secret practiced often. When their hands touched, it wasn't accidental. When she leaned in, it wasn't new. I didn't cry. I just memorized everything.
The time.
The place. The way the waiter recognized them. Patterns. That's what betrayal is made of. When I got home, I didn't wait for him. I sat by the window, lights off, and watched the reflection of the city instead of its truth. By the time Damien walked through the door, I'd already decided something important. He didn't need to know what I knew.
Not yet.
He kissed the top of my head. You're up late. So are you, I said softly. He smiled. Work never sleeps. Neither does guilt, I wanted to say. Days passed. He became more careful, phone always face down, laptop password changed. But carelessness isn't about technology, it's about ego. Damien's downfall was never his affair. It was his confidence that I wouldn't notice. And then one night I noticed something he didn't. An email. His computer screen left open just long enough as he stepped away. Not from Elena. From Martin Graves, one of the board members. A message that began. Dinner was lovely. She's as radiant as ever. Radiant. Martin was married. So was Damien. And apparently, Elena was radiant enough for both of them. I read the thread twice. There it was, Elena, juggling 2 lovers. One her boss, one a board member old enough to know better. And that was when something in me shifted from fury to focus. Because now, the story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about leverage. Elena wasn't just Damien's affair. She was a liability, and Damien, for all his cunning, had no idea. He thought he was playing her, but she was playing both of them. And I, sitting at our marble kitchen counter, with the email still glowing on his laptop, realized something else entirely. I didn't need to scream. I didn't even need to leave. Not yet. All I needed was proof, and time. That week, I called an old friend. A quiet, discreet man who'd once helped my father with a legal mess years ago. He wasn't a lawyer. He was the kind of man lawyers hired when they needed to be certain. A private investigator. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. He didn't ask for names. He only asked for a retainer and an address. What are we looking for, Mrs. Holt? He asked. I thought for a moment before answering. The truth, I said. And whatever it costs him to hide it. By the time Damien came home that night, the decision had already been made. He had his secrets.
Now, so did I.
He poured himself a drink, smiling easily, unaware that his empire had just grown a new shareholder, silence itself. I watched him from across the room, the man who'd once promised me partnership, now sitting in a suit built from my sacrifices. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt patient. Because what's more poetic than letting a man destroy himself? With the rope you handed him strand by strand, while he still thinks he's leading. Revenge doesn't begin with rage. It begins with paperwork. When people imagine vengeance, they see fire. I saw folders. Passwords. Receipts. Because fire burns once. But documentation? That burns forever. The investigator's name was Arthur Quinn. Polite, gray-haired, unremarkable in the best way. He had the look of someone who'd once been part of the system and decided it was more profitable to work around it. We met in a small cafe far from the city, the kind of place where secrets could pass for small talk. He ordered tea, no sugar. I had black coffee. You said your husband's in business, he began, notebook open but eyes on me. He's in empire building, I said. And empires tend to hide skeletons. He smiled faintly, writing nothing down yet. And the woman?
Colleague. Elena Ruiz.
But she's not just his problem. She's someone else's too. That made him look up. I slid a photo across the table. One from Lisbon, Damien and Elena mid-laughter. Then another. Elena and Martin Graves outside a hotel, his hand at her back, her smile too practiced to be innocent. Arthur nodded slowly. 2 birds, 1 scandal. I prefer to call it efficiency. He chuckled. What do you want from me, Mrs. Holt? I didn't answer right away. I stirred my coffee, watching the surface swirl. Then I said it, softly, clearly.
Proof.
Enough to make the truth undeniable, legally, publicly, and financially. He leaned back, studying me like a puzzle he was beginning to enjoy. Understood. And that was the moment everything changed, quietly, without ceremony. The hunt began. Arthur worked like water, slow, silent, unstoppable. Every few days, he sent updates encrypted through a private link. Photos.
Dates.
Recorded calls. Receipts from hotel bookings, dinners, even a set of flight itineraries under false corporate expenses. I studied them all with the calm of a surgeon. The shock was long gone. Now it was about construction, building something meticulous out of all the ways he'd underestimated me. Each folder had its own name. Lisbon. Zurich. Office. Board. Names that sounded ordinary, but carried a heartbeat. Then one evening, Arthur called. His voice was low, steady. We've got more than enough on your husband and the colleague. But there's another layer, Mrs. Holt. Go on. The board member, Graves, he's been helping your husband conceal internal fund transfers. Personal use, misreported as strategic expenses. For a moment, I said nothing. The silence stretched between us like glass. You're certain? Documented and time-stamped. If you ever wanted leverage, this is it. Leverage. Such a clean, corporate word for something as human as betrayal. That night, I opened my laptop and read through the files Arthur had sent. There it was, Damien's signature approving false invoices. Hotel costs filed under client accommodation. Private jet trips billed as research expansion. And buried in the middle of it all, a clause in our marriage contract, one I had once hated. The infidelity clause. It had been his idea. Before the wedding, he'd insisted we sign a prenup to protect the company. I'd agreed, though my family had warned me. Buried deep inside was a line that once felt cruel. In the event of extramarital misconduct by either party, the offending spouse shall forfeit all claims to shared corporate assets, in addition to compensatory damages for reputational harm. I had thought it was meant to punish me. Now it was his noose, written in his own language. I didn't tell Arthur about the clause right away. Instead, I asked him to expand the search, not just for infidelity but financial deceit. If I was going to end a marriage built on illusion, I wanted to end the illusion too. He agreed, amused. You don't just want justice, Mrs. Holt. You want architecture. Yes, I said. I want symmetry. Damien, of course, noticed nothing. He was radiant, the kind of confidence that only comes from living a double life and thinking you're winning both. He started whistling again in the mornings. He wore new cologne, bought a new watch, and said things like, "You seem calmer lately, Mara. It suits you." I almost laughed. If serenity were a weapon, mine was loaded. He'd smile and go to work, thinking I was fading from the story. But what he didn't understand was that silence wasn't retreat. It was pre-production. Arthur delivered the final file 3 weeks later. He handed it to me in a plain envelope.
No labels, no drama.
Just truth, bound in paper and ink.
It's all there, he said.
Enough? I asked. More than enough. He won't know what hit him. I thanked him, paid double his fee, and watched him disappear into the crowd. And as I held that envelope, evidence of years of deceit, arrogance, and misplaced confidence, I realized I didn't feel joy. Just clarity. Because real revenge isn't about pain. It's about restoration, about walking through the wreckage with your spine straighter than before. That night, as Damien slept beside me, I looked at him, peaceful, oblivious, dreaming perhaps of power. And I whispered to the dark, "You should have let me keep my name on the reports." Then I turned off the light and finally slept. Most people think revenge is a moment, a scene, a confrontation, loud, dramatic, devastating. They don't realize the real power sits quietly on a lawyer's desk, waiting for signatures. Her name was Camille Hart. We had gone to university together. I studied finance. She studied the art of dismantling men with contracts. We met in her office on a rainy Tuesday. Glass walls, marble floor, a shelf of law journals that looked like trophies. She didn't waste time. "Tell me everything." And so I did.
Damián, Elena, Graves.
Lisbon, Zurich. The dinners, the documents, the double life. Camille listened with the stillness of a statue and the focus of a hawk. When I finished, she exhaled slowly, almost in admiration. He really thought he could have it all. "He told me that once," I replied. "I just didn't know I wasn't included." She opened the prenup, the one I'd once signed with naive fingers and blind trust. She tapped one clause lightly with her pen. "This is your salvation." The infidelity clause. Damien's idea. Damien's language. Damien's downfall. In the event of extramarital misconduct by either party, the offending spouse shall forfeit all claims to shared corporate assets, in addition to compensatory damages for reputational harm. She sat back, smiling. "With the evidence you've shown me, he won't just lose half, Mara. He'll lose everything he claims he built." I felt something unfamiliar flicker through me. Not happiness, power. It tasted clean, cold.
Correct.
Camille glanced up. "Do you want him ruined quietly or loudly?" I considered the question carefully. There was a time I would have chosen quiet, dignity over drama. But dignity is useless if no one remembers what you endured. "Publicly," I said. "Let the narrative correct itself." She nodded once, as though she'd been waiting to hear that. "Then here's our timeline." A plan unfolded. Measured, legal, airtight. The investigators' files would be signed, dated, notarized. We'd set the trap inside a meeting Damien couldn't cancel. A mandatory quarterly review with the board. He would walk in certain of his success. He would walk out stripped of everything but his surname. "Divorce proceedings will begin the same day," Camille added. "The media release?" I asked. "Scheduled. Anonymous source. We'll let them choke on their admiration of his character." I stared at the page, the future written like a verdict. I signed my name at the bottom. Camille smiled, pleased. "This is just business, Mara. But some business is personal." That night, Damien came home early. A rarity. He said he'd missed me, wanted to take me to dinner. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded and let him hold the door open for me. At the restaurant, he reached across the table, touching my hand with the same charm that once felt like devotion. "You're quiet lately," he said. "Work," I replied. "My beautiful strategist," he smiled. "Always thinking." If only he knew what I was thinking. If only he knew that every time he smiled, the walls around him tightened a little more. He told me a story, something about landing new support from the board. He sounded proud, hopeful, untouchable. I looked at him and realized something important. He truly believed he'd won. There is no greater gift you can give a man like Damien than letting him believe that.
Right up until the end.
When we got home, he kissed me goodnight. Soft, sweet, rehearsed. I let him, not because I loved him, but because I wanted him to remember this brief comfort, when it was gone forever. As he drifted to sleep, I whispered silently into the dark, "This is your last peaceful night." And then I closed my eyes and finally dreamed of something other than surviving. There's a silence that doesn't mean peace. It means pressure, like the air before a storm, like a secret too large to stay quiet. That was the silence that settled over our house. At first, Damien thought it was me, that something in me had changed. He wasn't wrong, but he couldn't name it, and that drove him mad. He began circling, asking gentle questions that were really probes. "Everything okay at work? You seem distant lately. You're not angry with me, are you?" I would smile, slow and unbothered. Why would I be? He couldn't answer without confessing. And confession was not in Damien Holt's vocabulary. At Holt and Partners, whispers began to ripple through the corridors. Elena Ruiz had become unusually quiet too. Meetings that used to end in laughter now ended in tension. The boardroom, once Damien's stage, felt colder. I watched from a distance, through glass doors and careful glances, as his empire began to show its first hairline cracks. He snapped at staff, forgot details he never used to miss. And twice, he called me from the office, his voice softer than it had been in months. "Just wanted to hear your voice," he'd said. I almost pitied him. Almost. The real unraveling began with the press. A minor publication had published an article, speculating about questionable expense allocations within Holt and Partners. It was vague,
but the story had teeth.
When I read it over morning coffee, I smiled. It had been written by one of Camille's anonymous sources. A rehearsal before the performance. Damien saw it too. He threw the paper onto the counter, face pale with fury. "Someone's trying to smear me. You think so?" I said mildly, sipping my coffee. "It's ridiculous," he hissed. "They're twisting numbers. Who even talks to journalists like that? People you trust too much," I almost said. Instead, "You'll handle it, I'm sure." That infuriated him even more, my calmness. He wanted reaction, not composure. He wanted chaos to feel balanced by my panic. But I had stopped being his emotional accountant long ago. He started drinking more. Not much, just enough to loosen the edges of his control. His eyes darted when he spoke. His laughter arrived half a second too late. He no longer whistled in the mornings. And Elena, his bright, polished distraction, was suddenly on leave. Officially, it was personal reasons. Unofficially, the board had grown suspicious of her proximity to Damien. Martin Graves had stopped showing up altogether. The dominoes were falling, just as Camille predicted. At home, he tried to reclaim intimacy, as though affection could rewind time. He'd make dinner reservations, buy flowers, touch my shoulder in passing. But guilt makes gestures feel clumsy. Love can't survive the tremor of paranoia. One night, after too much wine, he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You used to adore me, Mara. I used to think you deserved it." The silence that followed was a perfect, clean slice. He looked stunned, almost frightened. And in that moment I knew he could feel the end coming. He just couldn't see from where. The day before the quarterly board review, he woke early, pacing. The confidence was gone. His shirt collar sat wrong, his cufflinks didn't match. Even his reflection looked uncertain. I watched from the doorway. "Big day?" I asked. He nodded stiffly. "Just a lot riding on this one." "You'll be brilliant," I said. He smiled, grateful, desperate. "I'm glad you still believe in me." I almost laughed at that. Belief wasn't what I had left. Blueprints were. That night, while he rehearsed his presentation in the study, I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside, Camille's neatly labeled envelope, the legal drafts, the evidence packet, the press release, the divorce papers. Tomorrow, everything would happen at once. He would stand in that boardroom, speak of growth, power, expansion, while the floor shifted beneath him. And I would be there, quiet in the back, watching his kingdom collapse under the weight of his own name. When I turned off the light, I caught a glimpse of him asleep, hands folded, expression tense even in dreams. For a moment, I remembered the man he'd been, the one who'd said we'd conquer the world together. Then I remembered what he'd done with my half of it, and I whispered softly, "You wanted to be a legend, Damien. Tomorrow you will be." Morning broke like glass, sharp, bright, and fragile. The city outside our window glittered with the kind of confidence I no longer needed. I dressed quietly, black suit, silk blouse, hair pinned back. Not morning clothes, though it would look like that later. Damien was already gone. He'd left early to prepare. The word felt ironic now. By the time I arrived at the headquarters, the building felt heavier. The air hummed with unspoken things. Assistants avoided eye contact. The receptionist's greeting was thin, careful, the way people speak when they've read headlines before the subject has. Upstairs, the boardroom doors were closed. Inside, 12 men and women who had once called me Mrs. Holt, with the practiced reverence reserved for the CEO's accessory. They were about to learn my name properly. Through the glass, I saw Damien standing at the head of the table. Impeccable suit, confident stance. But his eyes darted like a trapped animal's. The projector screen behind him glowed with slides about profit margins and future expansions. I watched him talk. His voice still had that polished rhythm, the cadence that once charmed investors. The same tone he'd used to convince me that partnership was love. But even from a distance, I could see it, the sweat gathering at his collar, the faint tremor in his hand when he changed the slide. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know who had lit the fuse. Camille stood near the back, disguised as a consultant. Her expression was neutral, almost bored. Only her eyes, sharp, amused, met mine when I entered. A small nod. Showtime. The door shut softly behind me. Every head turned. Damien faltered mid-sentence. Mara? He tried to make it sound surprised, affectionate even, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, smiling too tightly. You invited me, I replied. Well, I mean, of course, but it's a review meeting. For our company. The word "our" hung in the air like a challenge. Several board members exchanged glances. I walked to an empty seat and opened my folder. Inside were neatly stacked documents, Camille's handiwork, bound in quiet justice. Shall we begin? I asked. Damien blinked, thrown off his script. We were just discussing the last quarter's results. Then let's continue, I said, calm as still water. I'm especially interested in the expense reports, the ones tied to Ms. Elena Ruiz. The room stilled. Someone coughed. Damien's expression flickered, surprise, anger, then fear. I don't think that's relevant to. It's relevant, interrupted Martin Graves, his voice low, especially considering recent disclosures. There it was. The board already knew. They just needed someone to say it aloud. I pushed a document across the table. This, I said softly, is a record of company funds diverted to a private account, one that paid for Ms. Ruiz's apartment, her car, and several overseas trips. The signature authorizing those transfers? I looked up directly at Damien. Yours. A murmur rippled through the room. Damien's jaw clenched. This is absurd. You're making accusations. No, I said. I'm presenting evidence. There's a difference. Camille handed each board member a copy of the dossier. The sound of papers rustling filled the silence like rainfall. Then came the second envelope, smaller, white, and deliberate. And this, I continued, concerns the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. That got everyone's attention. Even the ones who had tried to look uninterested sat forward. Clause 14b. Any verified act of infidelity by either party nullifies shared ownership claims and requires restitution for damages incurred, personal or reputational. Signed by both of us. Damien's face drained of color. You wouldn't. I already have. I slid a photograph across the table. One Camille had obtained. Elena Ruiz. Damien. A hotel. The timestamp was painfully recent. The camera angle irrefutable. Restitution, I said quietly, will be processed through my lawyer. As of today, I'm filing for divorce and exercising my right to assume controlling shares under the breach clause. It was surreal, the silence that followed. Even the hum of the projector stopped when the screen went black. Someone exhaled. Someone else muttered, "My God." Damien looked around the table, seeking an ally, a denial, a rescue. None came. Power is loyal only when you can feed it. And he'd just run out of meals. Finally, he turned to me. You planned this, he said hoarsely. No, I said. You did. You just didn't read the fine print. When I walked out of that room, he was still standing there, surrounded by everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed with a soft, final sigh. That evening, the first news alert appeared online. Holt and Partners faces internal scandal. CEO steps down pending investigation. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blur into gold. He'd wanted to own everything. Now, even his name was slipping from the building's walls. You never really hear the moment a kingdom falls. It's quieter than you'd expect. Not thunder, not war cries. Just the sound of doors closing, emails unanswered, and a silence that spreads faster than rumor. That was how Damien Holt disappeared. The first headline hit within 24 hours. Holt and Partners investigated for misconduct, CEO temporarily suspended. By the second day, temporarily was gone. His photo was everywhere, the same one the company had used for years. Crisp suit, confident smile, eyes that promised control. Control he no longer had. News anchors discussed his fall from grace, like it was a performance, and in a way it was. I'd written the closing act myself. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my apartment. The new one, the one he didn't know existed. White walls, soft light, a kind of peace that felt earned. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't answer. Journalists wanting statements, old friends pretending concern, and one from Damien himself. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it. I didn't reply, because he still didn't understand. It wasn't about want. It was about balance. In the weeks that followed, the company issued a statement, carefully worded, emotionally sterile. Damien resigned for personal reasons. The board appointed an interim CEO. The shares, his shares, half of which now belonged to me, rose steadily as the market steadied. It was poetic, really. The company he built on deceit was now being saved by the woman he'd underestimated. Camille called it divine arithmetic. I called it justice with good timing. I didn't gloat. That's the strange thing about revenge when it's done right. It doesn't burn anymore. It cools. It clarifies. It frees you. I began rebuilding the life I'd postponed for his comfort, reconnecting with the design firm I'd left, funding a scholarship for women in business, buying back pieces of myself one decision at a time. I learned the taste of quiet independence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that stands still and doesn't apologize. 3 months later, I saw him again. By accident. A cafe I'd frequented long before we met. He looked smaller somehow. Not thinner, just diminished. The tailored suits were gone. He was reading a newspaper he wasn't really reading. When he noticed me, his expression shifted. Surprise, shame, something almost like longing. Mara, he said softly. Damien. We stood there for a moment, two people who used to be a team, and now were just evidence of each other's lessons. You ruined me, he whispered. No, I said gently. You did that yourself. I just kept the receipts. He looked away, jaw tight, and, for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just distance. The kind that means you've finally walked far enough away. Outside, the city hummed, newspapers printing, traffic moving, life continuing. And I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd taken back. Sometimes, victory doesn't roar. It breathes. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began writing the proposal for my own company. A consultancy built on what he never valued: ethics, strategy, balance. The name came to me easily. Ellison and Partners. The irony wasn't lost on me. Revenge was done. The empire was dust. But in the quiet, something else was beginning. Not rage, not ruin, but rebirth. And this time, the empire would have my name on every wall. Weeks have a strange way of passing. when you stop measuring them by someone else's schedule. I no longer woke to Damien's calendar alarms. No longer answered calls that began with, "Can you just handle this for me?" My mornings were mine again. And in that quiet, I began to remember what I sounded like. Ellison and Partners started small. 1 room, 2 laptops, a nameplate on a desk I built myself. Camille became my co-founder. She called us consultants in corporate ethics. But what we really were was a mirror, held up to companies that had forgotten how to tell the truth. We took meetings in coffee shops, drafted proposals at midnight, and said no more often than we said yes. Within 6 months, we had clients. Within a year, we had a waiting list. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman once erased behind her husband's empire, now lecturing executives on transparency and power balance. A magazine reached out for an interview. I almost declined, but Camille convinced me.
"Tell it," she said.
Not for him, for the ones watching.
So I did.
I spoke calmly about rebuilding, about boundaries, about how silence can be strength when it's chosen, not imposed. They titled the article, "Mara Ellison, the woman who left quietly and won loudly."
I didn't love the headline,
but I couldn't deny it was true. I learned to enjoy the quiet victories. The first signed client, the first employee who said, "You inspire me." The first Friday, I didn't feel like I was running from something. My success wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a language fluent in patience and precision. At night, when the city softened into light and shadow, I'd sit by the window with a glass of wine and realize I didn't miss the chaos. Not even a little. Sometimes people mention Damien in passing, like a name on an old billboard now faded under new paint. He'd taken a job as a consultant somewhere smaller.
No headlines, no cameras.
Just whispers. I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. He'd wanted to be unforgettable. Instead, he became a cautionary tale. And I, the woman who once signed everything, Mrs. Holt, had built something that outlasted his reputation. There's a kind of crown you earn quietly. Not the jeweled kind, not the one people bow to, but the one that sits invisible, made of endurance, of calm, of truth finally unburdened. That's the crown I wore now. No audience.
No applause. Just peace.
One evening, as the city lights blinked on below, Camille asked me, half teasing, "So, are you finally happy?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "Happiness isn't the goal," I said. "It's the side effect of getting your power back." She smiled. "Then I'd say you're glowing." When I locked up the office that night, the plaque on the door caught the reflection of the hallway light. Ellison and Partners. No ghosts left in the corners. No names that didn't belong. For the first time in years, I walked away without looking over my shoulder, because the past was no longer chasing me. It was behind glass, filed, archived, and closed. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of afternoon that feels suspended between things. Too late for morning, too early for evening. Camille had just left the office when the knock came. 3 soft taps. Uncertain. I almost didn't open the door. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe instinct, made me turn the handle. And there he was. Damien Holt. He looked older. Not in years, in weight. Like time had pressed down on him in places pride couldn't hold up anymore. The once perfect hair shorter, unstyled. The watch, the one he used to flaunt as if it measured his worth, was gone. For a moment, we just stood there. The hum of the city faint in the background.
Mara.
Damien. My voice was steady. His wasn't. He glanced around the office. The minimalist furniture, the awards, the calm order of it all. I could see the recognition flicker in his eyes. She really did it. "This is yours," he said quietly. "It is. You built this from nothing." "From what was left," I corrected. He nodded. There was no fight in him now. Just silence, the kind that comes after you finally stop pretending. He took a breath, then another. "I didn't come to argue," he said, "or to ask for anything." "Good." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "I came to apologize. The words landed gently, like a confession whispered to no one in particular. For what? I asked, even though I knew. He looked at me then, really looked, not like a man defending himself, but like someone finally seeing what he broke. For everything. For taking credit. For the lies. For making you small when you were the reason any of it worked. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said by time. He swallowed. I kept waiting to hate you, he said. For how it ended. For what you did. But I couldn't. That's because I didn't destroy you, Damien. I just stopped saving you. He exhaled, long and uneven, then nodded. You always were the stronger one. We stood there in silence for a while.
No bitterness. No nostalgia.
Just the quiet recognition that two people can share a history without sharing a future. He turned to leave, then paused. You look happy. I am. Good. And then he was gone. I sat down after he left. The office suddenly too still. Outside, the world went on. Cars moving, sunlight fading, life continuing. I realized something then. For years, I dreamed of hearing him say sorry. I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like closure. Soft, final, clean. Later that night, I called Camille. Guess who showed up today? Let me guess, the ghost of CEO's past. Something like that. And how do you feel? I thought for a moment.
Lighter, I said.
Like the story finally exhaled. When I got home, I poured a drink and stood by the window. The city glowed, calm, alive, endless. And for the first time, I didn't see it as something I had to conquer. Just something I belonged to. The past had finally finished talking. And all that was left was peace. There's a stillness that comes after the fire. Not emptiness, just calm. The kind that feels earned. The kind you can live inside. That's what life became in the months after Damien's visit.
Calm. Whole.
Uncomplicated. Ellison and Partners was thriving. We'd just signed our biggest contract yet, a multinational firm known for its beautiful slogans. And terrible conscience. I sat at the head of the meeting table, listening as our newest recruit presented her proposal. Confident, articulate, the same way I once spoke when no one was listening. Now they all listened. When she finished, Camille leaned toward me, whispering, You realize this place runs like a heartbeat now. I smiled. That's the point. We'd built something that pulsed with integrity. A company that didn't devour its own. And somehow, that felt like the most exquisite revenge of all. Outside, the city shimmered in late sunlight. All glass and motion and stories unfolding in windows. I walked home that evening, unhurried, past faces that didn't know mine. And didn't need to. Peace doesn't crave witnesses. It just is. When I reached my apartment, I found an envelope at the door. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single page. A transfer receipt from Damien. The final payment, fulfilling the restitution clause. Below his signature, a brief note. For what it's worth, thank you. You forced me to see the man I became. I read it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but completion. Some chapters deserve an ending, not a sequel. That night, I sat by the window again. Same glass, same skyline. But everything looked different. Or maybe I did. Revenge had been the spark. Justice, the journey. Peace, the destination I hadn't known I was walking toward. I realized I no longer defined myself by what I'd lost, or even what I'd won. Just by what I'd built. By who I'd become when no one was watching. There's a quiet kind of power in walking away. Without bitterness. Without noise. Without the need to be understood. I thought of the girl I used to be. The one who worked late, who believed love meant endurance. I wanted to tell her, you were never too much. You were just with someone too small. As the lights across the city flickered one by one, I raised my glass, not to revenge, not to victory, but to balance. Because power without peace is still a kind of prison. And I had no interest in being caged again. The night stretched quietly around me. The past was behind glass, the future an open door. And somewhere in between, right there, in the calm center of everything, sat the woman who had once been broken, now wearing her silence like a crown. For every woman who rebuilt her peace from ashes, this story is for you. Subscribe, share it forward, and remind someone tonight, silence can be power.